get that mentioned as well. The and this is a kind of a summary as well, sort of the summary of where we are with some of our watershed activities. I want to emphasize the fact that when we talk about watersheds, that we are interested in taking a one water approach. There are water is an exceptionally important resource for us. Our residents rely on water for consumption, for cooking. Our industry relies on that water supply to support much of our industry. And obviously, as we look at this community and the emphasis that we have on added value to agricultural products, those raw materials, corn, soybeans, come from our surrounding areas as well, and they depend on water very much too. So when you look at those different elements of a one water approach, when you're thinking of the waterways themselves, when you're thinking of the industry and individuals who rely on that water, we just can't tease out one element. We have to always think about that complete cycle of water as we look towards managing and trying to influence those different areas. So trying to bring this now down, stepping the scale down here a little bit. This initial slide is looking at watersheds that are currently participating in the Mississippi River Basin Healthy Watersheds Initiative. These are watershed level management activities that are bringing together regional partners within those areas that you see highlighted. And sometimes the focus can be on what the quality of that water is. It might also be on there's not enough water or there's too much water. And we're certainly familiar with a number of those circumstances here in Cedar Rapids. So in each of the watersheds identified here, and as we try and look at them moving down into Iowa, there are those same factors of occasionally too much water, too little water, and what is the quality of that water are a factor in Iowa. So now that we've highlighted watershed management authorities in Iowa, we can see that there are currently 23 identified authorities. And the circumstances that led to these I'll get to in the next slide. But the purpose of these watershed authorities is to, number one, conduct planning. What is the interest of the people that have come together to be part of those watershed authorities? Typically, you're looking at governmental entities or counties or soil and water conservation districts, but there may be non-profit entities that are interested as well. So what are they trying to come together to work on? That could certainly be assess and reduce flood risk. It may be to assess or improve water quality. Certainly they hope in many cases to leverage funding sources from federal or state programs. And they're always interested in facilitating education and stakeholder involvement in stormwater management. If you identify yourself and become approved as a watershed management authority, that it opens you up to some level of funding through the state of Iowa. And most importantly, Cedar Rapids is actively engaged in several of the areas highlighted on the map. Number 7, Indian Creek is one that we're involved with. We're also involved in the Middle Cedar, and we're also involved here in the Lower Cedar. So we are actively participating. We have approved those through the council to be part of those watershed authorities, and in many cases staff is taking leadership roles in those watershed authorities management structures. Going to look at each one of those areas specifically, but I just wanted to make sure that you had the whole state sense of what's going on. So we're going to start out with the Middle Cedar watershed. This WMA was formed in 2016 and has 26 member entities. We are a member of the board. They meet quarterly. Just you know, as I said, we've tried to step down. So the Middle Cedar itself, we're talking about the area that starts here in Cedar Rapids, goes up to Waterloo, Cedar Falls, and even moves west from there. So just within this one Watershed Management Authority, we have about 1 million acres in that area, approaching 2,500 square miles. So when we look at it on a HUD 8 scale like this, that's just think about how many different landowners and entities that you're involving with that. I think we do have 26 member entities. There could have been upwards of 55, but certainly half of those is a great number, and many of these are very small communities. Auburn, or Mount Auburn, Garrison, those are eligible entities, but certainly Waterloo, Cedar Falls, a number of the other larger ones are definitely part of this. So even within these areas of this watershed, we're working at a smaller scale. Right in the middle of this area right here is the Middle Cedar Partnership Project. We'll talk about that more specifically later. You also have other activities, as you can see on the highlight, that are part of the Iowa Flood Center, Iowa Watershed Project. This area here, and then further over off of 12 Mile Creek. Those areas are specifically involved as it relates maybe to more flood resilience aspect, whereas our Middle Cedar Partnership Project is more focused on water quality. Another factor, we do not currently contribute financially to the Middle Cedar Watershed Management Authority. We've not set up a due structure within that group. As a matter of fact, when that group was established, they were very much interested in not having a due structure at that time. Sometimes it's difficult to get things accomplished if you don't have those financial resources, but the state of Iowa does make planning money available to these entities, so that is a way to leverage funding without actually trying to raise it yourself. So at this point within the Middle Cedar Watershed Management Authority, you can see that a majority of the projects are being accomplished through the HUD funding source, which is primarily focused on flood resiliency planning. And again, many of those areas are targeted, and HUD was really emphasized areas that had low to moderate income levels that were pretty dramatically affected by potential flood events, so they really wanted to focus their efforts on areas within the watershed that had, or that met that specific criteria of low to moderate income, which is why it's not a more universally applied grant. It had to meet that LMI benchmark to begin with. But the actual current staff time and city financing is primarily been invested through our Middle Cedar Partnership Project. And as you can see, that was the first activity that we had in this area, but it's helped facilitate over $14 million in funding from the state. That's certainly primarily from the HUD and other federal sources such as the NRCS, the Natural Resources Conservation Service. So the Middle Cedar demonstrates how becoming involved, engaging with other partners, we've been able to leverage funds through other entities. When we started the Middle Cedar Partnership Project, we weren't aware that HUD was a possibility, but it's certainly something that's come in and is providing significant funding in that watershed. This is the work that's been completed so far in the Middle Cedar, under the Middle Cedar Watershed Management Authority. That initial hydrologic assessment, a more comprehensive watershed plan is underway. There's been data collection and monitoring, and they do have a coordinator in place, Adam Rodenberg. He works out of the East Central Iowa Council of Governments office here in Cedar Rapids. So now I wanted to talk about the Middle Cedar Partnership Project. And I know all these overlays of partnership projects, watershed management authorities can get a little bit complex, but unfortunately that's the nature of overlaying all of these different programs. Sometimes creates these different titles. So this project was originally intended to leverage funding through the NRCS and what they called their Regional Conservation Partnership Program. Starting with the Farm Bill in 2014, and I'm sure you've heard talk about the Farm Bill in 2018, but in 2014, this was the first time that government entities like a water utility or a wastewater utility could be involved with this Regional Conservation Partnership Program. So the majority of emphasis was funding on, or looking at field practices, cover crops, how fields were tilled, that kind of thing. But we chose a funding source, the state funding pool, to pursue that did allow us to think about flood reduction benefits as well. In Cedar Rapids, when we look upstream, we want to talk about those multiple benefits when we're trying to pursue funding opportunities. But in this case, our most significant focus to begin with was trying to reduce nitrates, because this is a source water contribution for our water supply. So I just handed you copies of our 2018 update report for the Middle Cedar Partnership Project. They go into pretty significant detail on the acres that have been involved with that project. Again, trying to give you that broader overview of the watershed with the presentation today, but that detail is available, and if you have any questions, please let me know. The thing that I think is most dramatic with the Middle Cedar Partnership Project is that it really shows the wide variety of people who want to come together and work on some of our water quality and water quantity challenges. We were the first of a kind in Iowa and potentially the nation as it looked at this Middle Cedar Partnership Program, or using these regional conservation dollars. But it also highlights the fact that it's a great example of that one water approach. We're trying to get everybody who potentially might be part of the problem also talking about how they can potentially be part of the solution. So from a funding standpoint, this is the area where Cedar Rapids as a city has spent the bulk of its dollars through utilities contributions that we've authorized through the budget and through council action. To date, we have spent slightly under $300,000 by the city of Cedar Rapids. A portion of that is staff time, but other portion is direct financial contribution. Some of that has paid for outreach so that we can actually be connecting individually with farmers and landowners in that area that we talked about earlier. We're on track for meeting the goal of spending that $4.3 million. We still have 2 more years, 2.5 years roughly, of the project to go. The project will be in place through June of 2020. Again, that spending of Cedar Rapids of $278 has leveraged approximately $1.3 million from other partners. And I do want to acknowledge the Iowa Soybean Association, the Iowa Department of Ag and Land Stewardship, and IDNR are a majority of that funding. And then the NRCS through RCPP has then contributed $1.6 million that has been used for reimbursable practices by farmers and landowners. So let's talk a little bit about data. We've been actively in the watershed for a little over 2 growing seasons now. This is a highlight of trying to understand as we've spent some of those resources in that middle Cedar, what's the data informing us? And again, I'm pretty reluctant after 2 years to say that we have significant trends, but we can certainly highlight some things that we've learned to date. So we pursued what we called snapshot samples throughout that middle Cedar area pretty extensively in 2017 and 2018. And 2 samples were collected per site in 2017, and in 2018 we collected 5 samples per site. Again, you're only able to get out there a limited number of times during a season. So weather is consistently changing, cropping, the nature of what's going on with the crop at that time is changing. But what we want to learn over the 5+ years that we'll be in this area is, as we look at having those cover crops in there for a substantial period, what do we see about the impact of them on potentially reducing nitrate runoff or phosphorus. So we do feel that it's important to get out and collect this data, and again, this is the data collection. Several of those samples have been activities that we've specifically paid for, and we have worked with the Iowa Soybean Association and Crow College have helped us with those sampling efforts. So both the sediment and phosphorus runoff areas, we've seen significant changes in the runoff regimen. Certainly last summer, we know that we started out in the March-April timeframe. It was fairly dry. And then as the summer went on, we saw progressively larger, higher amounts of runoff. And that's some of the things that you see in both these sediment and phosphorus areas. That in 2018, we did see some higher levels of sediment and phosphorus because phosphorus tends to move with sediments. So that's not unusual that you'd see those changes, but it does highlight the fact that what we see in terms of precipitation patterns every summer or every year can influence some of what these sample results look like. All right. So that was nitrate, sediment. Thought I had a phosphorus one in there, but in any case, the results of some of the sampling are what we wanted to illustrate today. That we're not going to state that there are any trends specifically from the 2 years that we currently have, but we will continue to do that monitoring and sampling as we move forward, because just if we clearly identify areas within these specific ones that continue to show up, I believe that's Black Hawk Creek, that may be areas that we want to focus on in the future, and it will certainly highlight ones that will receive a more direct benefit if we do pursue specific projects from cover crops to wetlands to whatever that may be. I do want to talk about some things that are being done here within Linn County. In 2016, Linn County voters passed the Water and Land Legacy bond issue. That provided a opportunity for, this was a late slide edition, that's why it may not be in the packet. That does provide some specific funding, so we have been in consultation with Conservation Department about pursuing some runoff. This highlights the area in Morgan Creek Park and some of the projects that we're looking at there. You can see here Cedar Rapids, there may be some stormwater detention, other projects that can benefit from work within that. And all of these areas are upstream of a discharge point that does potentially influence some of our wells too. So this is an area within Linn County that is upstream of Cedar Rapids that will hopefully have some benefits for our community and for the regional area too. Indian Creek Watershed Management Authority. The members, there's, as you can imagine, Robbins, Hiawatha, Cedar Rapids, Marion are all involved. The Watershed Management Plan was completed in 2015. There's a comprehensive watershed evaluation that's also been completed. They're trying to select a soil health coordinator position at this time. They've been continuing to conduct public outreach and annual reporting. As you can see from this point, Cedar Rapids has contributed a little over $37,000. That's approximately $12,500 every year to date. We do want to mention that Marion has finally approved their initial contribution. Their annual contribution will be a little bit higher than ours. The contribution amounts are structured based on the amount of creek bank miles that are within the different communities. So again, this shows from a perspective of this is to some extent a water quality initiative, but again, you've also had flash flooding within the Indian Creek watershed as well. So this Watershed Management Authority will help focus some of those projects in something that's right close to home. And then there are the Lower Cedar Watershed. Again, they're continuing to work on many of the activities that are been mentioned for the previous ones. We do not require a financial or a monetary contribution for this one yet, but I would say that this one is just getting started in terms of its focus, and we certainly will continue to participate in this area as well. And as you've seen in many occasions, we are working within our own boundaries, municipal boundaries. If we're going to ask others to take on projects, we want to demonstrate that we're doing the right thing here in Cedar Rapids as well. So the stormwater master plan and all those things that you've heard about from an activity perspective apply within our municipal borders, as well as trying to influence what's going on upstream. So we've got multiple benefits from being involved in these watersheds. We're trying to act on ensuring flood resiliency, maybe water quality and source water. In the case of Cedar Rapids, there's some pretty profound benefits from an economic vibrancy. We need to ensure that we're working with our partners upstream. We've been able to leverage contributions from a significant number of sources, and all of this is a part of ensuring that we have a sustainable future for Cedar Rapids, for our watershed, and for our community.
Great. Thank you, Steve. Yeah, that a lot of detail, and like you say, this has more of that information in it.
That has more information specifically about the Middle Cedar Partnership.
Middle Cedar, okay. Any questions for Steve?
Well, I would just say that, this is a game of inches in the long run. There's so much to do better and differently, and unfortunately, we can't get there in a real fast way. But in your estimation, with all of the efforts that are going on, not just in the city, obviously we can control that more, but in the broader area, how much progress are we really making towards getting closer to where we want to go while at the same time things are developing and so on, which have to be dealt with. Are we actually making real progress in improving not only the water quality, but also the flood situation?
I compare this with like a test lab. You know, we are in areas within the Middle Cedar Partnership Project, we have cover crops on over 20% of the row crop acres. So we've found ways to make that happen. It's going to take financial resources to do that. But the thing that we have found that's absolutely necessary is that you've got to make personal connections with the farmers, producers, the landowners. And so that was a big part of that Middle Cedar project, because we wanted to provide that resource. The NRCS typically waits for people to walk in the door. We wanted to be walking out the door and getting onto farms and actually talking about people, how they can make this happen. So we found a receptive audience to that. I'm not going to diminish the fact that in these, you know, with current commodity pricing, it's a tough sell in some respects. But you have, you know, there's a number of activities going on through the Midwest Row Crop Collaborative, other activities that are trying to find resources for this effort. So we're continuing to maintain our engagement and will after this, our 2020 Middle Cedar project is done. We've actually sat down with state NRCS office and are looking at trying to put together another project to leverage additional funding. So yes, we've made headway, but that doesn't mean that there isn't a lot of work to do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would encourage that. Thank you.
Yep. Tyler?
Who controls you said the 1.6 million from the RCPP, what is like projects?
Right.
Who, are those projects done in the area or are they projects done by the, you know?
They are projects that are identified, in some cases our outreach consultant identified, you know, cover crops. So through various financial pools, they were able to pay for, in some cases, maybe up to 2/3 or 3/4 the cost of applying that row crop. But in every case, that had to be certified by the NRCS before they released that funding. So we put together the plan, as it were, but that plan had to be certified by NRCS.
But you're driving that, the partnership is driving those projects.
Yes.
They just
Okay,
didn't happen
yeah.
to happen.
They
And
didn't
they
happen
might
to
not have
happen.
happened except for the fact that.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important. I mean, like I said, I'm very impressed with all that's going on. It takes time, as Scott mentioned, but I think the fact that we're participating with people we're building relationships, and we could stay inside our city boundaries and fight our battle. But I think by participating and putting some funds on the table, it's going to pay dividends because it's coming through us. It's going to flow through our city. And so I'm pretty excited about the cooperation in what, 2 years, 3 years that's developed. It's pretty impressive.
And you're going to hear more from us about things like nutrient registry, potentially nutrient trading. Those are going to be some things that we'll have some subsequent discussions on.
Great. Thank you, Steve, and appreciate the detail, and we'll definitely take a look through the packet